Welcome to another Divorce Workshop Live. Today we're talking with Rodrigo Perez about get bitter or get better. I'm just going to invite him on. Just let you know that our Just Separated podcasts to listen to that. Hello, Rodrigo, sorry. There.
Yeah.
Good,
How you doing?
good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, so when you, before we get started, I
Yeah.
just want to say, I just love this topic. I like get bitter or get better. I just thought, that was brilliant. I just really like it. But before we get started, if you want to just tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. I am unrelated to any divorce stuff. I'm a film critic. I work for an art school. A bit of a jack of all trades. I've been doing digital stuff for many, many years. I used to work at MTV for many years. And then I got divorced or I'm, soon to be divorced. And it started in January 2023. And I went through a kind of transformative journey, and I have come out the other side uh, very different and feeling like I want to help people. And I've already kind of been doing it on my own. Like some of my friends were going through it, and people have been already saying that, like, wow, you're good at this kind of thing. Like you're helpful, and so I've just continued to do it. And then I thought it sort of snowballed into, yeah, I think I should soft launch this idea of trying to, coaching.
That's right. So let's talk about this great topic you want to talk about, and I'll help you too. But get bitter or get better, right? And I thought, geez, that's so true, right? And I want to start off by, why don't we talk a little bit how people get bitter in divorce?
I mean, that one's pretty obvious, right? Like people just get emotional, angry, upset, and they don't look to rein themselves in at all. Divorce is let's face it, it's devastating. Everybody who's been through it knows that. And you become in a very vulnerable spot. You sometimes become very desperate. You sometimes become very angry. Sometimes you become very scared, it's a lot of lurching emotions, a lot of big, like reaching for things. And anger is generally a big part of it. And if you are not mindful and thoughtful about it, and if you probably don't do any therapy or anything like that, like bitterness can calcify. And it can and then once it does, it's like, nothing is impossible to change, but I think calcified bitterness is a tough one. It's like it just gets into there, and then you just have, and once you've reached that point or you're approaching that point, I gotta assume that your any kind of relationship you have with your ex is going to be very contentious, and if you have children, that's going to ruin them, and it's going to ruin everything. And I guess for me, when I heard that sort of phrase, it was the light bulb moment for me. That's why I sort of chose my, it's going to be called, get bitter or get better divorce coaching. And because that was the eureka moment for me, the light bulb that went off that said, you're either going to get bitter or you're going to get better. And that felt like, to me, like the only two choices that I had. And of course, nothing's binary and black and white, but it did really feel like that. Like I was just either going to get really, really bitter, and I knew exactly what that was going to be. That was going to be anger or resent, all the negative stuff that's going to like make everything worse. I mean, and then or get better. And then so I think I started trying to do better to begin with, right off the bat, if we want to get into my story, my journey. But certainly at a key way, somewhere in the middle of it, maybe after the first 6 months, I think I heard that phrase, and I just was like, okay, you need to, here's the choice. Which one are you going to do? And I thought, for the sake of everything, and also, like, I'll be candid that I was I think my old self was a much more angrier and pessimistic and cynical and all that stuff, glass half empty person. And bitter self felt like too simple. Like it could easily get there. Like it wouldn't be hard for me to get bitter. And then I thought, yeah, all the more reason why I need to, like, not do it. I just had to, like, sort of stand up to it and turn my back to it and move forward and just try and get better. And that's hard. It's, none of this stuff is easy, and the journey is always going to be tremendously hard, but nothing worth doing isn't hard. So yeah, I'm
sorry, go
no,
ahead.
I'm done.
So do you find that, people start getting bitter because they're not really aware that they're going down that place of bitterness, right? So, kind of in that circle of being that victim mindset, right? Or
100%.
they're ruminating, or they're comparing how the ex is doing compared to how you're doing, right? So I just want to describe to people, like, how there can be an awareness that if you kind of aware, like you kind of woke up going, okay, I'm going down a really bad hole here. Like, I'm getting angry when I hear, I see my ex, or the relationship with a new partner, or I'm struggling mentally. That's another thing, is there's some people that can really struggle with mental health with this, right?
I
So
absolutely did.
yeah, and I think David, that's research based as well, right? And sometimes for some men, I think it's research well that they can suffer from depression and stuff, because men generally don't generally, talk about their feelings with others, right? They usually keep a lot of it inside. So it's culturally too. And then also I find sometimes we can get more bitter because we start isolating, we stop socializing. So those are just some of the things I want to mention on how it can show up for people, right?
Yeah, like you just mentioned so many ways, and it does show. It can be like invasive. It can show it can rear its head in so many ways, And even now, like, there's always still, like, I'm 2 years out and my situation is very good, but there's sometimes some things will come up and I'm like triggered in a minor way, and I'm like, I'll be a little bit upset, and I have to really work and think about, like a big part of this for me, and I think something that I would be advocating for people is to really try and get a sense of self-awareness, like that's, it's really, really important. And also just being incredibly mindful, rather than like, and sort of trying to catch yourself and, all that stuff, like self-regulating,
Yeah, I mean, unless you've been through divorce, you don't understand how emotionally deregulated you can be,
Absolutely.
right? Like, it can be, because it is for many, it's a huge foundational loss. So everything goes poof, right? And so even if you left or were left, there's, everything's going to change anyways, financially, emotionally, your kids, your identity, right? So the whole picture needs to be looked at. And I think for years and years and years, we've just focused on divorce with legal, right? It's like, it's a legal thing. It's a legal thing.
Oh my
But
God,
really,
no.
really, right, Rodrigo, it is and that's, I think, where my passion comes from too. It's a whole holistic thing. It's not just the legal. It's an aspect. I'm not saying it's not a big aspect, but it's just one aspect of a whole process of getting through divorce.
For sure. And the legal part of it is connected to the emotional part of it, because if it's going to be contentious, then legally that only exacerbates it. And then I mean, you can be in a real, I can really snowball into something destructive. And I was, I don't know, smart enough or scared enough to, like, just be like, no, I can't do that,
Yeah. But there are people that still do get stuck in that bitterness, especially with people that are dealing with more high conflict post-divorce, right? Because it continues and continues, and it's really hard not to go down that.
That's got to be incredibly difficult. I think one of the things that I essentially did right almost from the beginning was, I don't know if I decided, but okay, this is how I think about it, and this is what I would advocate in any kind of coaching that I would do. It's just like, divorce is hard enough as it is. It's so horrible. It's so painful. It's so devastating. Why would I make it worse? You know what I mean? it is already like the worst thing that for most people, it's the worst thing that ever happens to them. And then, you know, things move on and they hopefully recover. But that's the other part, I guess, about the bitter better part. Like, you know, you know, we all kind of know this, I think, like really transformative big moments in people's lives can be these sort of like, make or break moments, you know. And some people, like, they feel like, oh, I'm never going to recover from this, and I think in some cases that's probably true. Some people don't get over it, they don't recover from it. I have a friend who's been divorced for 27 years, and every time she tells me about her ex, he sounds like happened yesterday. He's in the same place. He hasn't grown, and he hasn't basically had a relationship in that time because of it. Because his bitterness is calcified so brutally that nobody wants to be around him. And it's like, if you can think about all those things logically, would you want that, right? Would you want, like, would you not be, I mean, to me, it's like, oh my God, that makes a lot of sense. I don't want to have that happen because I would like to have a relationship. I would like to have other people to love or to care for. And this guy is just like, I mean, you know, he's almost like, part of that in my journey was hearing his story and then just being like, my God, like that's like the bitterness personified to me. It's like this, he never learned, he never changed. He just dug in his heels that, you know, he was wronged, he was the victim, and he didn't try and change or better in anything. And his life sounds like it's really suffered for it, and it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I had a lady like that. I was doing a presentation at a Chartwell, you know, residence, and we were talking about death, you know, grief from widows and widowers.
Yeah.
And this lady came on, like, she's like, "Oh, Karen, I'm so angry." And I said, "Oh, well, anger can be a part of grief, right? Just like with divorce." Yeah. She goes, "Oh no, I'm not grieving because of my death of my husband. I'm grieving for my 20-year divorce." And I was like, "You've been grieving and bitter." Like, and the word bitter is the right word for her because you could tell on her face she was just bitter, right? It was bitter, right? So it was still sitting there.
Yeah,
which
and
as
who wants, right? Who wants that in their body?
No,
you know what I mean? Like,
sad.
Not only like is it socially and emotionally terrible for everybody around you, that can't be good for your health either. Like, you know, this bitterness, this resent that lives in you, like, I don't know. It just feels like it just feels like, given the situation so terrible, it kind of feels pretty easy to get there if you're not, you know,
it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. And so I guess one of the things I would sort of advocate for is like to people to like from the start, if you can, try and like see how you can make this as low conflict as possible. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you might, I know it's really, really hard. People feel betrayed. They feel abandoned. They feel so much rage and anger and betrayal and abandonment are I think probably two of the biggest feelings that come up. And and they're so overwhelming and they're so overpowering that you start to think in ways that aren't very rational and very logical, and you're just lashing out. And but like, if you can sort of start at a place of trying to reduce the conflict as much as possible, I think you're going to, it's like harm reduction. You're going to reduce harm for everybody, yourself, your ex, if you have children, your children for sure. And harm reduction is a real thing, right? So
let's talk about it a little bit. So we talked a bit about the bitterness that seeps in.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about how can we suggest things like help, like to make them better. So as you said, we talked about at the beginning, awareness. Awareness is to me, it's a huge thing, because as soon as you're aware, like, you know, whoa, I'm really angry. My legal bills are getting really high because I keep writing legal letters and I'm getting mad. Now, some of it's going to be justified, obviously, right? But how are some ways that you think that people should, tips or tools, we would call them, that they can get better?
Right. Well, I can give you what I did, because that's my personal experience. And I essentially, I mean, the full story is, it's essentially, you know, I thought I thought I could get this person back. I thought I could get my ex-wife back. And so I really started attacking the idea of like, okay, I do have problems, and I recognize that, and I realize that. So I'm going to do all these things. Of course, it didn't work, but I knew, I even said that to myself, and sort of the people that I talked to is like, okay, well, you know, I guess in some ways I'm doing this to get this person back, but if I don't, I'm going to be, it's self-improvement anyhow, and it's going to be, there's no downside. It's all upside regardless of, of what happens. So in that regard, so I was like, what do I need to do to better myself? And so I thought I need to get back into therapy. I've been out of therapy for a long, long time, and things like bitterness and resent in our relationship had built up, and that's one of the reasons that she left. So I got into therapy, and I started doing it a lot, like twice a week for almost a year, or probably a year and a little bit. And then I kept doing it and kept doing it all the time. So then I started doing that, and then that brings a lot of self-awareness and clarity, and the sort of your problems. And then I just started trying to looking at it analytically, and I quickly pinpointed that my main problem is I don't know how to cope with my stress. And I have a lot of stress because I have 2 jobs, and like I didn't have stress management. And so then I started like, what can I do to like, reduce my stress? So I started like reading books and Googling things of like, what can I do to deal with stress? And so that's like, and some of it I kind of already knew because I'd already done it, but like, it's nice to like, sort of, I almost made it like a plan, and part of that was like, okay, I need to go to the gyms because I need to get my stress out. So I started going to the gym all the time. And to this day, I still do it like every single day. And now I feel like it's my must. I have to go to the gym every day because it's a baseline of like, just getting like, it's almost like I look at it as like when you're boiling water and it starts to steam, like it helps. It just, it's cathartic. It releases a lot of stuff. And I do it first thing in the morning because it starts my day really, really well. So I did that. I did a lot of meditation to sort of like try and, regulate myself. And then I got familiar with terms like that I didn't know things like self-regulate and what that term was. But then I started like looking online and reading about stuff. And then, one book leads to another, leads to another, and leads to another. One of the first things I did was because, it was easy to frustrate. I was impatient, and I was easy to get angry. And I sometimes did that with my children. And that was another reason my wife was, my ex-wife left me. And so I read a book about, I think it's called How to Not Lose Your Shit with Your Children. I can't remember the name of the author, but yeah, how to not lose your shit, something like that, with your children. And I read that, and one of the things that came up in it was like Stuart Shanker's book of self-regulation. He's a Canadian author, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to read that, and that leads to another thing, and that leads to another thing, and that led me to hearing Stuart talk about the Gottman, that duo of they're psychologists, right? They're marriage experts essentially, and they talk about divorce and stuff like that all the time, and relationships. And so that led me to that, and one book leads to another. And then if you're really like, I was like, I need to get better. I know I've been a mess for a few years now, and I haven't been my best, and I've been taking all my frustrations out on other people, and I've been very selfish. And a lot of that had to do with like being so stressed out that I wasn't self-aware, that I wasn't aware of how I was treating people. I wasn't aware of how my mood was. I wasn't aware that like I was holding anger and bitterness and frustration on my face, and that people could feel it, that energy. So then, and all these things lead to you like, oh, okay, well, this is serious self-awareness. So I was reading stuff all the time. I do audiobooks. So I would listen to stuff at every single chance I got. I would write things down. I would quote phrases to try and get it in my head. I would listen to audiobooks over and over again. I listened to, there's another one that I read that was really good, which is Good Inside by, it's a parenting book by Dr. Becky, I forget her name, but it's called Good Inside. It's very popular, and it's very, very good. I read that a lot of times too. It has a great positive outlook too, which is the idea that like all children fundamentally are good inside. You just need to, how to get your mindset to that. And so it was gym, therapy, meditation, and reading lots, and doing a lot of things like getting walks and going out. And so I was like really, really sort of attacking this thing of like how to manage my stress so I could get better. It's like I identified what my problem was. I probably quickly identified it in therapy, and then I was like, okay, these are the things I need to do. And very quickly, I really got on top of all my emotions and everything. And, I didn't want well, one, I wanted to get get back together with her, but I didn't want a high conflict thing. And when I was told, like, look, no, sorry, my decision was always stood. It was always the same. I could have gone, like, what am I going to do? Right. Like, I think, like, if I get, what am I going to do? Okay. I'm tossing all this stuff out the window. I've worked for 6 months doing all this stuff. Like, I mean, maybe somebody would, but I thought, my God, I've done all this stuff. I already felt like I kind of gone on this mini journey, 6 months of like really feeling like I had changed myself and really changing the temperature of who I was, and my persona and my personality, and just my general energy. And I was incredibly bummed out, and I was incredibly sad, because I was like, okay, there's definite finality to this. I knew. But I was like, okay, well, this sucks, but there's no reason why I should stop. So I'm sad again. I'm grieving this stuff over again. I'm going through the 5 stages of grief that for my marriage and for all this stuff. But that doesn't say that I have to stop any of this stuff. So I didn't, and I kept doing all of it. And I suppose if there's a cautionary tale, at one point I really overdid it, injured myself, and stopped working out for almost 8 months, and that was a very, very rough 8 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that one of the things that a lot of people do is they do the exercise, whatever type of exercise it is, but it's one really good tool that they can use. Yeah. I also wanted to mention practicing it sounds kind of what you were doing as well, but it's called self-compassion. So it's treating yourself the way you would talk to your best friend. And so we tend to beat ourselves up a lot.
Yes.
There's a lot of guilt in divorce, whether you left or we're left. Like you were just saying, maybe I wasn't the best father and husband, and that's why, so there's a lot of emotion and guilt there, right? So there's a lot of ways to practice self-compassion. As you said, be mindful, but also, say to yourself, reframe it when you're starting to beat yourself up, and just say, reframe it. Is this really going to help me? Let's talk more positively to ourselves, right?
Yeah. Well, in that regard, I would say of all the tools that one has, I think what did you call it? Self-compassion?
Self-compassion. Mm-hmm.
I would say that was the one I struggled with the most, for sure. And it's probably the one that I still have to work on. And it's probably the one that of all those things, is just the one that I was the worst at, I guess. Maybe it's still in some levels, and maybe you can hear it through. I definitely at first thought, like, this is all my fault. I felt incredibly guilty. I felt incredible shame. I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody for months. I hid away from people. I isolated because I didn't want to have to deal with having that conversation. And yeah, like a lot of guilt. And even still to this day, like, it's only been recently in the last few months, 3 or 4 months, when I've started to recognize some of the things that, it does take 2 to tango, right? And I've started to really, for me, a lot of things are verbalizing or vocalizing, or it needs to be, identified. Like the thing has to be like, so I've been able to identify certain things about my ex, and like, oh yeah, some of those things, and it's making me realize, and it's still still a process, is that, like, this is not just all you. This is not all on you. There are reasons why this didn't happen. But yeah, the self-compassion is really important, and negative self-talk is something we all do, but in divorce, a lot of people can really fall prey to it, and I absolutely certainly did.
Yeah, we do. In my workbook, Just Separate, we have this thing of responsibility. What was your responsibility? Because we all have, whether it's 10%, 50%, 15%, have some type of responsibility for the divorce, right? And so it's another thing that can help you get less bitter. If you look at that and go, okay, so I did this.
Yes.
But they did this, contributed, but then you can, and then as you get through the process more, you can start self-reflecting, going, okay, I want to be in another relationship. I don't want to repeat the same patterns, right? So it's also a huge learning opportunity, right? Yeah. And I also want to mention that it's a closing of, like, if you can think of it as you grieve through the process, but if you can think of it as this chapter is closed, it's over, but you have many more chapters of your big book in life, right? It's just a way to reflect it's hard when you're in the acute part of
Right.
divorce to think this way.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
It's like, it's almost impossible to hear any of this stuff, right? Like you said, that's a good way to frame it. It's so acute that it's just, you're in a
Mm-hmm.
hurricane,
Yeah.
and people are trying to give you advice, and you're in an emotional hurricane, and
Yeah.
you're in the center of it, and it's brutal. But this is why some of the things that you can do to sort of like maybe turn that a little less chaotically, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the tools that I started doing. And I'm really glad you brought up the idea of responsibility, because that was something that I call it, accountability, right? And for me, that was something I latched onto very quickly too, through therapy. And like, that my therapist talked about that a lot. Let's be accountable for what we're accountable for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once you do that, you're right. It's like it already starts to like lessen the tension of bitterness, because that there's things that you're not like fault, but there are things that you're responsible and accountable for, and you've contributed to this situation. You're not a victim in
Yeah.
this, there's always, like that's maybe the other part. And that's really, really hard for people to get there. Like, I was left in a pretty shitty way, and I could have just focused on that and gotten really, really angry. Or what I did, through therapy and things like that, and helping to think about it, is like, well, why did that happen out of the blue? Like, did oh, this person's so mean? No, there were reasons why. And what are some of those reasons? They're directly responsible for the way I behaved and who I was. And so, self-awareness, accountability, all these things. Like, I probably could not stress therapy enough, like, immediately, because like, if you have a good therapist or a good divorce coach or whatever, someone who really understands emotion and psychology and stuff like that, it's like taking that victim mindset and lodging something in the middle of it to like stop it from preventing it. It's like, wait, hold on. Like, I know you're angry, I know you're upset, but that's why, like, meditation, anything to bring yourself down, to be able to listen. Because like, it's such a good thing you said, that acuteness. It's like, you're not going to hear anything. So if you are even mindful enough to know that this is just so horrible, and how can we make it a little less horrible? I think these are all tools that help, and then bring us down even just a few degrees, a few points of temperature or whatever, and make us a little bit more open to hearing and listening, and not pointing fingers and all that, and build from there.
Yeah, I think another I lost my train of thought. Um, anyways, I was going to say, I want to make sure that we also want to mention that you make sure you get the right support systems, because, if you're not talking to the right people, and they're helping you make you feel even more bitter and put you down
Absolutely.
that path, being more angry, then it's not going to work. So make sure you have the right friends, the right therapist, the right coach, the right family members, right? Because sometimes family and friends are not going to be as supportive as you need. So you have to be mindful of
There's
that. And I want to also
definitely,
mention,
yeah.
sorry?
I was going to say, there's definitely like poison out there that you have to avoid.
Oh, for sure. Because I've been there where I had a friend that the poison kept coming. We divorced at the same time. 5 years later, she's still talking about the poison. And I'm like, I can't talk about this anymore. Right. So
Right.
just be mindful of that. And also, I want to also mention that anger is okay. It's a healthy emotion, except you need to have the right outlet for it. Right. So that's when you're saying, go to the gym, pound the pavement, go for a long walk, write, journaling, like just write, figure out ways that help you, as you said, bring you down a few.
Yeah.
So, because it needs to come out. If you're angry, that's okay. It just has to come out in healthy ways. But anyways, before we wrap up, do you have anything else to say about the get bitter or get better?
Um, I don't know. I guess it was go straight into another point that I was gonna make. It's just essentially, for me, one of the things that I also like, and I was sort of saying about like pinpointing, identifying. I found a lot of mantras and like little phrases, and get bitter, get better was one of them, that I just sort of would write these down, and then because they were just so succinct, so these little maxims, and so like it said everything. It's so much and so little, right? And they were easy to remember, and I could think of them. And so, like you were talking about anger, I think about another one. Like anger is a poison pill that you take to kill, to hurt the other person. That you take yourself to hurt the other person, right? I.e., you take it to kill them, and it doesn't hurt them at all. It only kills you. And it's like when you hear something like that, it's like, to me, it's like, oh yeah, makes a lot of sense, right? Like, so I need to avoid that. So yeah, I don't know. It's been that's been just really, really a helpful key mantra for me. Just kind of reminding myself all that, get bitter, get better. Another way that I heard it that I really liked, that really spoke to me. I think that's also helpful, finding things that speak to you. But one thing that really did is someone just said, like, when something tragic or horrible happens, handle it well and it'll go well. Handle it poorly and it'll go poorly. And I thought, yeah, that sounds about right. So
Yeah.
I try to just handle it well. Handle something terrible well. You can. It's possible, right?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think that's why you and the other people I talked to were all in this field, because we want it to be done better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know what I was doing, and I'm a child from divorce, and high conflict parents, right? I went through it all. I've seen it all. And then still I thought, oh, I know about divorce. I had no idea. Not on the other side, not as the parent, as the adult, right? So, and everyone I talk to, it's always the same thing. It's like there's a real passion behind us trying to help people, because we can do it better. We just don't know how to, because we've never been taught to. Like, you don't know what divorce is like. So it's, and just to wrap up at the, conclude is, like we started off saying, like, yes, legal is one process, but it's such there's so many things like that involve divorce, right?
Yeah.
So you have to look at the whole picture when you're going through divorce, especially as you start getting out of that acute, right? And another thing, just to finish up, is I think another theme that came up today is a lot of awareness. If you become aware that you're feeling, like you're like really resenting all the time, or you're finding yourself really angry or hot-headed, or isolating, not talking to people, I think awareness is one of the first steps to help you not going down that bad road of bitterness. So where can people, what's your Instagram account so they can follow you?
My Instagram account is Your Only Hopes. That's my personal, and then I have my one I started for divorce coaching, which is basically get better divorcing. I think I don't use them very much. I just started, but it'll be on my Your Only Hopes account. So, and I always think that, hope, right? Positivity at the end of the day, like, look, this is miserable. We get it. I think everybody who's gone through this gets it, and they want to support you, but they want to, like you said, help people and help do it better, right? It doesn't have to be, it's an awful situation. It doesn't have to be that awful,
right.
Or at least, there's ways to mitigate that.
Well, thank you for coming on. It was great to talk to you. And I know you're coming on the podcast soon, end of May, I hope.
Yeah.
And we can talk about this again, right? Because it's a really important topic. And I love your hashtag, your title, because it's a good affirmation, actually. It's a good mantra. So
it really is.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.